She had backbone, spine. I respected that, though I didn't know her well and certainly not well enough to call her Shani. We weren't buddies. I don't want to presume friendship. We were colleagues and loners. We worked on the same faculty in the same institution, but we occupied different rungs of a hierarchy neither of us cared for, but which nonetheless wedged us apart. Or we let it, or I let it. No matter how much reason you smear around it, it's impossible not to have regrets when people up and die on you. Anyway, I admired Beatrice. She came down on the right side of things in faculty meetings. She brought an impish wit to her politics. She was always working, and she had a beautiful spine. You can tell from her Paschimottanasana, her forward fold. Sit with your legs extended, recollect the floor to the backs of your knees, push your heels forward, pull your toes back, and lift your spine lightly, as if a thread were tickling your head to float up in the air. Begin with your lower lumbar vertebrae and move upwards, one by one, adding, if you can, a millimeter of space between each disc. Think, if it helps, about spools of thread. Stack them. Only then lean forward from the hips, keeping intact the full extension of the spine. Stop the moment the spine begins to curve. Back off. Now figure out how to stay there at the maximum extension of the spine, minus a tiny fraction, for 5 minutes or so. Figure out how to relax. Once you have the answer, the solution particular to your muscles, your bones, your mind, your scars, float your elbows beside your knees, if possible, all the way down to the floor to rest your forearms and allow the head to drop. Finding comfort in this apparently simple pose, no matter how flexible you happen to be, is the mark of an advanced practitioner. When you can remain for minutes upon end in a forward fold, you exude elegance. That elegance will mark all of your other actions, rising from a chair, opening a door, chopping kale, having pills, embarking upon the practice of dying. Elegance is about choice, about taste, about selection, about paying attention, about consistency, about priorities. When cancer was reinventing itself in Beatrice, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, she'd found something. We happened to be walking across campus to a set of battered trailers for the institutional ritual of reviews of first-year grad students, really a surveillance operation. A horrible sort of office visit to see whether or not young artists can be discerned to be already before they've even started fucking up. As we walked, and Beatrice hadn't gotten back the scan results, she said, "If they tell me I'm going to die, I will be so pissed. Really, really pissed." And then she picked up the pace. Cancer was getting in her way, and it made her walk faster. I don't remember anything I saw that day or anything that was said, just that there was no fear when she announced how angry she was going to be. But telling this sort of story is dangerous. I didn't know Beatrice well, but it's accurate to say that it would have revolted her or amused her or both to be portrayed as a victim or as courageous or as an object of pity. In other words, my paltry memories are irrelevant. Beatrice picked the difficult way to exit and made it look easy. She chose to survive cancer by getting it outside herself before it killed her, while it was killing her, to represent the social thicket that is illness by making work, meaning wasting time in style while manufacturing more of it for herself. Cancer will strangle you, but if you run, other people's fear of their own mortality will trip you. If you're an artist and you catch cancer, you have to thieve your work from the cells that have gone megalomaniac. It's an issue of aesthetics. It's not a choice. It's an ethical decision in favor of elegance, which is to say, paying attention. So, 3 screens, 3 black screens, and it begins with sound. Something is being tapped, something more plastic than metallic. Somewhere there's water, and there's type fading in to make the words of the piece. When there's nothing to see and little to read, you listen harder. And when there is finally something to see, center screen, while the framing screens are still black, it's Beatrice walking in a wide corridor. She's walking next to a guy. He's walking politely, considerately, so much more slowly than he need to that his balance seems impaired. She's concentrating on staying upright. She wears a cancer hat, a turban that might as well say, doing chemo on the front, or hair loss due to radiation. The skin below her eyes is dark. When the other two screens come in, she's doing some sort of hand-eye coordination exercises, back and forth, back and forth. And on the center screen, she and the guy, holding hands, now move away from the camera. Their contact is not romantic, but it is intimate. Once we've understood this, the center frame cuts to outdoors. She's using a walker on a busy Manhattan street, and then the framing shots, left and right, close in on her negotiating a door. Everything looks urban, big and bruising and dangerous. The center shot and the side shots are replaced by the signifiers of science: gloves, needles, grids, Petri dishes, formica, scales, and finally a brief shot of a mouse, hairless and pink, being injected. That shot in turn is replaced by hands sorting pills into the sort of plastic container you buy at CVS to organize vitamins and contribute to yet another billion-dollar industry. So, 3 screens, 2 sides, science versus a sick artist. Cut to the preparation of healthy vegetables, lots of dark green leafies. Though her face isn't in the frame, I'd recognize that spine anywhere, not to mention her particular tempo of restlessness, her particular bangs and thumps and rustles in the name of efficiency. Science stuff, veggies, and pill sorters, intercut every now and again with a mouse or two, until finally it's all mice everywhere. Not all the way down, but sideways on all 3 screens, no cutaways. And to be honest, mice are what my eyes have been wanting to investigate since the piece began. Nobody has explained anything about Beatrice, about rodents, about cancer, about metastasis. Not one tired word about age or waste or feminism. But now, and only now when it's mice everywhere, a woman's voice says, and it's shocking to hear a human speak in English. These are female mice. They're about 4 to 6 weeks old. Because we're studying breast cancer, we're using female mice. But no lingering shots of that face. By this time, we've switched to the back of her head, walking away from us in that same corridor. And then in the center, Beatrice seated and counting backwards by 7s, which is not so easy at the best of times, but not at all easy after you've just had brain surgery. And by the way, the place where this DIY therapy is happening doesn't look like any place she'd live, or Robert either. But there he is anyway, with his calm, firm voice. Truck. She spells it backwards like a child. K-C-U-R-K. Table, same idea. Patience, a forward fold on the left-hand screen, some limbering exercises on the right. Then the woman scientist voice again, with the mice, center stage. This is to kind of give you an example of how we set the animals up for radiation. It's not very high-tech. We can treat 2 animals at a time, and essentially we just use these sticks. There's a lot of gizmo to the science biz. Aluminum foil and popsicle sticks. It's not just because mice don't rate expensive supplies. I've noticed a lot of Price Club bricolage in those environments where people try to kill cancer cells in humans without killing the humans. A fundamental link between 2 bright ideas got overlooked, and the master plan would be wrecked without a popsicle stick. Anyway. Either I can watch my colleague relearning basic cognitive skills and doing yoga light, or I can stare at the mice, which is what I have been doing, not only because it is less painful emotionally, but also because it is somewhat erotic. Dead or anesthetized or just waking up, and it embarrasses me to say this, my eyes register engorged pink tissue almost bursting through skin. Think erect penis or very excited labia, or giant nipples. Engorged, fecund, swollen, hairless, pinkish purple. Think viewer dwarfed by the size of a projected mouse. It's the relationship you used to have in the old days when porn happened in movie theaters. The piece is called Dying for the Other, but the question is who the other is and to what exactly. Are the mice dying for Beatrice or she for them? Are the mice dying for those who get socked with cancer, or is Beatrice dying for those same women, which is to say for me and for the rest of you out there? The phrase dying for the other vibrates with desire, lust, pleasure, sex, wanting to fuck, as in I'm dying for you, I'm dying to see you, I'm dying to fuck you, I'd die for you. Count all the little deaths. Or perhaps the suggestion is dying for the other lover, not you, perhaps a kind of confession of infidelity. A productive muddle, but the gloved science hands don't seem to notice that the mice they touched resemble dildos. Really. And it is more distressing to watch these smooth and costly mice mauled in the name of science than it is to see my colleague doing the exercises that will help her relearn balance, coordination, and speech. Maybe she knows it's pointless. Walking straight, spelling backwards, counting backwards, living backwards, it's all backwards, and she refuses to act as if there's a race. Of course, I care more about Beatrice than about mice, but when I watch the mice being sliced open or rumpled aluminum foil and pinned down with popsicle sticks so that someone who knows better can see how the radiation worked on their tumors or not, I have the knee-jerk urge to go all vegan, or PETA, or weepy about the mistreatment of innocent animals. Perhaps the mice feel pain, perhaps their naked skin will burn and chafe, except of course that it is they who are dying for the other and I am the other. I should be grateful to them and their pain, and to Beatrice, who in the scheme of things was also a lab animal serving a larger agenda. Someone kept records on her, just like someone's kept records on other women who made it or didn't, and whose accounts tabulated resulted in the protocols she follows. She's had brain surgery because her breast cancer erupted in her brain, and she's following instructions for recovering from the colonization. Dying of breast cancer is a long, slow process, but she didn't choose to depict the more common dramas, surgery, scars, or the slow administration of toxic chemicals. She's chosen to present the clerical route, in order to lay her hands on the relentless invisibility that cancer is. She's making cancer material without speaking directly about it or without showing it. Gloved hands slice a salmon-colored thing the size of a pea out of the groin of a mouse. The hands try to cut the tumor in half, but it has to be held in place with tweezers. Cancer is hard and it's slippery. That's not a metaphorical statement. On one screen, gloved hands pin down the lump. On another screen, Beatrice elongates her spine and floats into a forward fold. A pose, a metaphor, and at this point, a relief. The little lump that lands in the glass dish, removed from the body of a nameless mouse dildo, an other, if ever there were an other. Seems at once too small to kill my colleague and too trivial to justify exterminating anything as insignificant as the mouse from which it was extracted. The very last part of the work is about balance. She walks that corridor again. She tries, in the safety of the angle made by two walls, to do a version of mountain pose. Balance your weight on both feet. Then make sure that your weight is distributed equally on all four corners of each foot. Then transfer your weight to your left foot and raise the right foot, placing it against the top of your left thigh, or that being impossible, wherever you can along your left leg, with the exception of the knee. When you feel secure in your balance, close your eyes. Balance is a matter not of stillness, but of a series of small and constant adjustments, unremarkable repetitions of singular acts of constructing a self, which are absolutely all we have been given in the 12 minutes of dying for the other. Innocuous moves, simple exercises, an inventory of the repetitions it takes to become and remain human, which gets you no dispensation. Beatrice closes her eyes before she's secure. And that's it.
I wanted to leave a space in the reading to let the sounds repeat through our oral memories, and to lock onto certain phrases that people might want to repeat when we open things for talking. And then I want to go here. Living and dying with companion species. Because what I want to pay attention to in inhabiting dying for the other, this searing, severe, repetitious, ricocheting between fierce, boring, horrible, terrorizing, boring, ordinary, mimesis that undoes itself, copying that refuses to allow copying, identification that refuses you the solace, or me anyway, the solace of identification at every turn. The sheer repetitive ordinariness of a very severe formal presentation of an interrogative project, dying for the other. And I think that that Catherine did a very precise job of indicating the searing ambiguity of the meaning of the term other, and of dying, and of for, and the multiple tones, including the tones of eros, and the joining of death, eros and thanatos, in a kind of ordinary and terrible desire presented in a triptych, each panel of which continues to insist on the detailed repetitions of the movements. Okay? So partly because I think I'm not alone in finding these 12 minutes very hard to inhabit, I want to I want to offer a certain kind of opportunity or solace of contextualizing it in Beatrice's lifelong interspecies work. That from the get-go of her work, back when she's worrying about biosensors and technologies of acoustic sensing and so on, completely without living critters in some of the very earliest work, she has a profound sense of partnering with things, with people, with questions, a kind of constant collaborationist, a constant moving into the interrogative of the political, what is to be done, what can be done, who is here, who are we, and so what. And the who is not always living and not always organic. But also very early on in her collaborations with free-range grain, with molecular invasion, the 2002-2004 work, with her work with Gentera or with the Critical Art Ensemble, when she's working with transgenics. She's doing in-your-face kinds of public art. Her art is never politically correct, most certainly not for her allies. When she does a transgenic bacterial release machine and puts it in the hands of kindergartners, these days she'd be locked up as a terrorist. Beatrice is never engaged in those kinds of art projects that produce the solutions or the easy answers to transgenic encounters. She is never anti-science. Science is never the capital O other. Science and engineering are her. She is a scientist and engineer and artist and vulnerable human being and animal and mammal and colonized relentlessly by yeast and bacteria and all the rest of it. And transgenetics is an old Terran game. In fact, it's the Terran game that invented semiosis 3.5 billion or so years ago and makes the very fact of language materially possible. Beatrice has a kind of she co-inhabits with the teeny tinies in these early projects, and with technologies and technologists, and with the politics that question the newcomers, the transgenics that maybe shouldn't be here but are, thank you. And now how do we live and die with them well enough to have a kind of ongoingness? What kind of going on together will there be? So a later project, Invisible Others, which I think quite deliberately invokes the iconography of space invasion, of the kind of the lighting for the alien dissection. There's a use of light and form that plays directly with science fiction tropes that I call to our attention, that I remind us of. But I want to spend the bulk of my comments on 4 projects that are interspecies work that I think of as within the framework that we shared with each other of companion species, living and dying well within companion species worlds, where companion species are not the game for fuzzy wuzzies, but for being at table together, not quite knowing who is on the menu. Cum panis, companion. That making live and die in codependency, that we are engaged in each other in extremely interesting ways of the kind that made her co-write with Kavita Phillips the Tactical Biopolitics, to put the Tactical Biopolitics book together. That making live and letting die biopolitics of Foucault, the making die and letting live necropolitics of Mbembe, the making live to make die. The making live is the inhabits the companion species projects in ways that intrigue me a great deal, and I see dying for the other, particularly the relationship with the mice, who are made to live in very particular ways as part of this work. So I want to start with Pigeon Blog, a project that got her in trouble with People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, at Irvine. They wrote and complained about the Pigeon Blog project because it didn't even have the justifications of being for science and medicine, but was merely art. Okay? It didn't even rise to the seriousness of torture for the cure. Okay? Which perhaps wouldn't justify anything from PETA's point of view, but at least had the justification of torturing for the cure. Needless to say, Beatrice and I are in deep alliance that torture for the cure is of lesser value than living and dying with each other for a whole range of things, which might, with trepidation, include torture for the cure, which I'll get to in a minute. But her Pigeon Blog project was the engagement with the pigeon racing fanciers of Los Angeles. Everyone in this room must know that pigeon racing is one of the most macho sports around, that pigeon racing is a masculine pursuit, has been a masculine pursuit for a couple thousand years, that the pigeon lofts on the rooftops of Cairo, maybe even now, the ongoing pigeon lofts on the rooftops of Tehran, even in the face of the imams who tolerate barely the pigeon racing, but try to suppress it. The immigrant populations in Berlin or in Brooklyn or on the waterfront, Pigeon racing is a male working class sport of alliance with fancy pigeons, homing pigeons. It's a really interesting sport. These are closely bred pigeons. There are many kinds. Darwin hung out with the pigeon breeders of Spitalfields, the working class pigeon breeders of the fine lace and silk textile workers who resisted the de-skilling and the factory reduction of the destruction of the craft weaving that endured in the high-value fancy weavers longer, and who also had high-value fancy pigeons. People in this room probably know that the theory of natural selection would not exist in its present form without the fancy pigeons of Spitalfields and Darwin's habits of hanging out with those guys. Bay just hung out with the pigeon breeders of LA and San Jose, and Bob Matsuyama, who taught shop in LA high schools. Finding a pigeon breeder who's going to trust you is no small trick, because you might be a PETA shill. You really might be. You really might be out for the outrage footage, etc. Beatrice builds trust. Beatrice and her students and the other engineers on the project build trust. They get in with a few of the pigeon breeders who are willing to work with them, barely. They build packs. It takes them a year to miniaturize the packs efficiently so the drag wouldn't make a pigeon easy prey for the falcons that inhabit our cities. As we all know, you've got real-time online. You can watch the peregrines raise their kids on the ledges in San Jose. I'm sure this is true. Anyway, you know that the raptors take the pigeons out of the sky. Pigeons are a great lunch for a falcon. The Pigeon Blog people worked really hard to build a pack that wouldn't produce too much drag for the pigeon to enlist the pigeons in the scene. The pigeons were working, racing, sport, animals in deep practices of love, deep masculine practices of cross-species love of very particular historical kinds that are extended into practices of love and work in the art project. They fly in art projects in San Jose and in Irvine. PETA gets furious at this misuse of animals. Working animals are not okay. Torture for the cure might be, but working animals are truly not okay unless they are subject of rescue or heritage. These animals are neither, thank you. They are art theorists, they are engineers, they are workers. And this is not an easy scene, okay? So Pigeon Blog is a project. I have written some about Pigeon Blog and could go on at great length, but I will spare you the great length to get us to Companion Species 2, which is a museum-based project where she goes into the dark spaces. This is in the UK. The cabinets of the museums for the specimens that come out of the dark spaces, they have a birth date. Their birth date is the date they are, quote, described by scientists. Close quote. Their birth is the birth into the light of a certain kind of modernism. The modernist knowledge is of a particular kind of museum-based scientific knowledge, which is, again, absolutely fundamental to the practices of love of nature that I and every other white middle-class girl grew up with. There's a lot to say about race, gender, and science in these practices of love rooted in the museums. I will just mention it, and we may talk about it later. The specimens come out of the cabinets, as you see there, and are laid out. But these are specimens of critters who have not yet gone extinct, who maybe yet live on, who may yet have ongoing generations. So it presents them to us in their form of born into science as dead specimens to raise the question of what their living future might or might not be, depending on who responds to the invitation to, as Tom Van Doorn, a person in the Extinction Studies group in Australia, asks, what does it mean to hold open space for another? What is it to exist not on the point of extinction, because no more than a cancer death is an extinction death a point. It is an extended process. Okay? It is a ledge, not a point. Okay? And the question of what is it to hold open space for another, which is a real question, is what animates the Extinction Studies group, and I think it animates Beatrice's interspecies work. Okay? There are also these really interesting taxonomies. These are all of the critters in this project are, quote, endangered, close quote, which is a regulatory category. It is a legal category. It allows the critters to have certain kinds of privileges and unprivileges, certain kinds of invasive processes and protections. It is a legal category that prescribes allowable operations on them and for them. Okay? To be the subject of a species survival plan, if you're a female, heaven help you, because your eggs are very valuable. And anybody who has very valuable eggs is in real trouble in a species survival plan. Anyway, living and dying for the other is tough. Now, I lay this out in part because it is visually like the table, and because it is philosophically very similar to what I've been trying to say. Orchids who need to attract the wasps and bees for pollinators do these amazing, they build their sexual parts to look like a female, a really luscious, hyper female bee, not just regular old ordinary, really attractive female bee, sexy parts to male bees, but really even better than that, so that the pollinators go to the orchids in a state of serious desire, and pick up the pollen and then fly in a state of serious desire to the next orchid that's mimicking the species-specific insect genitals. Right now, just any old insect genitals will do. There's a mimesis going on here that is a mimesis of joy and sensuality and what Natasha Meyer calls involutionary momentum rather than evolutionary momentum. This kind of drawing that is at the root of organic life. I mean, those critters that eat each other and partially digest each other and form the first complex cells are doing sex before it had a name. It's really serious stuff. Well, what happens when the insects are extinct and the orchid is still making the parts? What happens when the orchid has been abandoned by its lover? Well, that's what this is about. There are these orchids whose flowers look like bees, okay? And the orchid, draws the bees, but the orchid's still making the flowers, and these bees have gone extinct. Maybe because of the toxins in the environment, maybe because of the mites that are affecting bees worldwide. There is a species collapse of bees and pollinators going on worldwide. Okay, this is a big deal. This plant has lost its bee. And they say without its partner, the orchid has resorted to self-pollinating. I mean, its monism all this stuff. It's resorted to self-pollinating, which is good enough to get the next generation for a while, But the orchid is doomed. It is on the edge of extinction. So the cartoonist here paints the flower saying this is the idea of what a female bee looked like to the male bee as interpreted by a plant, the only memory of the bee that is left. Okay? And then the cartoon kids say, I will remember you, bee, I will remember you, bee, and disappear from the frame. That is dying for the other two. That is in the frame of a memoir for the still living or the maybe just disappeared when they haven't yet quite all disappeared. Anybody who loves bees knows this is incredibly timely. Well then, I can finally go to dying for the other, and I can finally let Catherine's hearing, reading, representing of dying for the other I can finally inhabit it. And I inhabit it too from those first scenes of walking, but I see assisted living, and I begin with literally, I think this is a video about assisted living. And I see the fierceness of an urban woman who moves back to New York. California can't quite make it for a real city in that time she had left, however long it was going to be, back to the streets of New York and insisting on those kinds of apparatuses that will give her access to the streets. And those apparatuses include her friend Robert, include her other friends, include that walker machine, include her balance exercises, include everything that will give her access to the city. So we see her struggling through the door of a shop. By the way, look at the pattern on that dress, because I'm going to have something to say about that. The spine that Catherine evokes is, of course, echoed in the dress. And it is echoed on the scar of her skull that we can't yet see, but we are given a close of it by late in the video. Okay. Then we get the ordinary apparatuses and protocols of laboratory life, kitchen life, everyday life. I am, maybe because I grew up as a biologist, sort of, the ordinariness of scientific stuff is what I see done in these pictures. The everydayness of it, the non-shockingness of it. The vials, the pill boxes, the petri dishes, the gloved hands, the knife on the cutting board, the operations, the protocols, the cuttings, the everydayness, there's techie equipment in your kitchen, there's techie equipment in the lab, there's all sorts of techie stuff, which is absolutely part of the ordinariness of the dailiness of a cyborg life, of assisted living. Weighing surrogates, assisting surrogates, the mouse on the scale, weighing, cutting, injecting. The kale are gorgeous, of course, in a way that the naked mice is shocking. But the kale are also research organisms in the Cost of Life project. The kale are part of the Life Garden, the Delicious Apothecary, the efforts to try to coordinate the integrative health research with the allopathic cancer research, the lack of coordination of research practices. The kale are research organisms, everybody as much as that mouse. Okay? And I know because we were talking about a chapter I wrote in When Species Meet called Sharing Suffering, when non-mimetic, like when you can't do it through identification or similarity, the non-mimetic sharing of suffering, that one of the reasons she seeks out the lab mice in the hospital where she's being treated and tries to build, again, trust with the researcher. What, again, are you a PETA shill? Again, you know, is this expose stuff? How can we trust you? I mean, you have cancer, that makes it even scarier for the researcher. I mean, these mice have got breast cancer, give me a break. Are you gonna break down in the lab? You know, no, I'm not. I am a, you know, okay, so she builds trust again, and she gets in the lab. These are off-the-shelf mice. You can order them from a catalog. They are transgenic. They are part of a little over a century of breeding off-the-shelf mice for scientific research. You can get a catalog of the mice. Look at Kathy High's Rat Love Project. And her, you know, she adopts retired breeders, naked rats, who bore the same autoimmune illness that she herself suffers from. The question of what will constitute payback here. What sort of debt is incurred by making live and making die? These mice are not treated cruelty. This is not torture for the cure. This is not torture. The mice are anesthetized. They are handled very gently. It is impossible to watch. Okay? You know, they are spread out, and then biosimilar tissue is put down so the radiation can deal with the piece of tissue that's too small and have enough gel-like, flesh-like stuff that the radiation can be realised. This is ordinary lab science, and I think Beatrice is insisting that we see it that way. Spelling backwards and bodily figures, this is the folding forward. Me with a hip replacement who isn't allowed to go beyond 90 degrees, cringes, you know, at the hip dislocating as I try to match Beatrice's posture. One's own scars, Catherine said. Feeling the postures with one's own scars. The spelling backwards with Robert. Watch the way Beatrice uses formal elements, the way the triptych panels are laid out, the way her body is a spelling apparatus even while she's spelling. Watch the way the semiosis of the bodily forms and the, you know, the semiosis of the spelling backwards. Watch the way she does it. Watch the way she interrupts any kind of identification inside, well, certain kinds of identification inside this project. Cutting, again, the ordinariness of it, cutting the pills to eat yourself, measuring, cutting, laying out. And then these mice have eyes. Those eyes are not incidental. None of us can meet those eyes without the interrogative question of what then? Okay, oops, back. The anti-cancer survival kit, which is downstairs to look at. The sketch, I got a screenshot, which is the rapid sketching, which is really quite wonderful. I think there are several parts to the Cost of Life project. Dying for the Other is one of them. The anti-cancer survival kit is another one. The Life Garden, the Delicious Apothecary, and what I'm calling Companion Species 5, which is Lucinia, Bringer of Light. Because I think Lucinia, Bringer of Light, the name of her dog in the last year, is part of the Cost of Life inquiry, part of the Cost of Life figuring out how to live and die well, when you are built into each other in a non-innocent way. Lucinia is not about being cute. Lucinia is, of course, an incredible gift of joy that Beatrice bought for money from a breeder of Labradoodles from online advertising. Bundle of joy. Okay. Again, the non-innocence of it is striking. Okay, her friends are saying, get the puppy. Robert will make sure the puppy has a good life if he finds he can't keep her. Instead, he bought a summer camp for her, near as I can tell, in upstate New York and changed his job. Hi, Robert. I think you bought that land for Lucinia after summer camp last year, but we'll get there later. Okay, in the beginning, the notion of a puppy was shocking in the household. She is part of the anti-cancer way of life. Now, watch those begonias and think of those naked mice. Okay, those are highly genetically selected plant breeding. They are exactly like those off-the-shelf mice. These are purpose-bred dogs within the Labradoodle new breed purpose breeding scene. Beatrice and I are trading back and forth the ads for the various Labradoodles and examining the puppies, and I'm sure she's doing that with a zillion friends in this period. This is Lucinia. This is her sister, littermate sister, altogether more rambunctious and loves everybody sort of dog than Lucinia appeared to be. Lucinia was calmer, more work person-like, looked like that sort of partner. She's in a supermarket cart, not an accident. Okay? And they engage in the process of training for dying for and with the other. Watch the chewed through leash. Not all training was successful. They are on the subway platform. That harness was like the walker, part of the apparatus of living and dying in that year. It was part of being able to get onto the streets, trying to be safe enough in the subway, with a dog who didn't get quite heavy enough to qualify officially as a service dog for balance, because you have to be a certain weight, because you have to be able to handle the leaning of a person whose balance is failing. So Lucinia, who was able to fly to Germany, fly to New York, fly to California, was flying with papers as an assistance dog from early on, and was in training from the get-go. This was a year of training, just like dying for the other. I mean, it is part of the project of dying for and with, living for and with. Beatrice was living for Lucinia and vice versa. The last slide that I have there is also part of the training. It's an agility slide, which you'll recognize. This is a dog summer camp in upstate New York. Beatrice was very conscious of race politics, among other things, and race and class politics. And for her, the notion of going to an upstate New York dog camp raised certain allergies. For Robert, even more so. No way I'm going. They were both at dog camp for a full week. In all of the activities of agility and frisbee and flyball and swimming and every other thing, which was training they were making each other capable. They were rendering each other capable, in Van Cinda's phrase terms. They were learning to be affected in the mode of joy and fear and failure and success. And I am, because I think this panel of Lucinia on that jump belongs in dying for the other every bit as much as radiating those tumors. They both are in Beatrice's practice of interspecies work for learning how to live and die well with and for each other.